All right, the dog dads from Barkology are back.
Swing.
Had a fantastic episode with Ronny Lejeune. I'm going to mess that up 100 times.
Lejeune.
Lejeune.
I think it's Lejeune.
Lejeune.
Beautiful woman out of Louisiana.
I
haven't seen her, but she was so knowledgeable. It was an amazing episode. Greg, tell us a little bit about her.
A little bit about her. She is a certified professional dog trainer, a certified canine conditioning coach, a certified canine nutritionist, a certified fear-free professional for dogs and cats, which was really cool to talk about.
Yep.
Something I've never heard before.
Yep.
And she's certified in CPR and first aid for dogs and cats.
That's something I'd like to get into a little bit more, though. You know, we got into, it was kind of crazy. She has given the Heimlich to her dog multiple times, which is wild. But
yeah, there's a crazy story in there about that. So definitely a great episode. Listen up and Oh, what?
I was gonna say wag more, bark less, but no.
Okay, wag more, bark less.
No, follow.
Do it.
Follow her.
Do it. Okay, we're gonna follow her at perfectlyrawesome.com. That's her website. At Perfectly Rawesome on Instagram, as well as Facebook. She's got a bunch of sites and does a bunch of things. Definitely an interesting person to get on that.
And perfectlyrawesome.com. Check out the website. She's amazing. She does a lot of amazing
I
things
just said
for
all
dogs.
that stuff.
Hey, I'm just reiterating. Check out Mission Slim Impossible as well. She crushes all that stuff. She's out of Louisiana. Fuck yeah. I love this girl at Perfectly Rawesome. Thank you, Ronny. Let's go.
Let's do it.
That's amazing.
The dogs.
Is that even a real story?
That's a fact.
This is complete nonsense, Greg.
Read a book.
I guess you are kind of artistic.
Incredible.
What are you even talking about, man?
Go for broke.
I don't even know what that means. Let's get it going.
Let's get her going. Keep her going, baby.
Hello, fam. How you doing? It's Scott with Barkology and my buddy Greg sitting with me as usual.
I love how you introduce that like they're sitting here with us, but they're not.
It's like we're having a big old dinner sitting around a round table, right?
No.
Again, I'm very, very excited, Greg, to say that we have an awesome guest on today.
Oh, yeah.
We've chatted a little bit, but, it seems like cooking, or not even cooking, but raw dog feeding is becoming a more popular facet in whether it's training or just treating or dealing with your dogs in general. It seems like that's becoming a more popular thing, and I think it's not only becoming more popular in I want to say these experts' lives, but it's becoming more mainstream. So I'm very excited. We're very excited to have Ronny on. And Ronny, I don't want to screw this up, but tell me how to pronounce your last name.
My name is Ronny Lejeune, and I am a certified canine nutritionist here out in Louisiana.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We're excited to talk to you about this.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And just to preface this conversation, we actually had a recommendation from one of our previous podcasts, Scott Marshall. He's a very good guy. It was one of our better podcasts so far. He talked about raw dog feeding as well. For those of you just jumping onto the podcast, if you want to follow him, it's at DogDadOfficial. But he told us to reach out to you because he said you were one of the experts on the topic.
And I actually watched that. Well, I didn't watch it. I listened to that podcast, and that's great that you guys interviewed him. I love Scott.
Yeah, how do you know Scott?
Oh, we actually work together a lot with raw feeding. So we kind of back and forth, send clients to each other. He has his own group. I have my own group, own businesses with different mindsets and services. So we kind of complement each other in that regard.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So, hey, do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do in your spare time, just a little bit about you.
So I am in the very south of Louisiana, the bottom of the boot. And I am a certified canine nutritionist, certified professional dog trainer, certified canine conditioning coach. I guess you could say I'm the full-time dog lady. All I do is things dogs. And my main focus in general, I like to dabble in behavior, fitness, and nutrition. That's the three facets of my work. My off time is pretty much spending my time with my dogs. So it's constantly doing things like that. So behavior, I like to do sporting type obedience work. And I do like to help pet parents with obese pets achieve a healthier lifestyle. So because obesity is a main problem in our canine companions nowadays, and I do believe nutrition is a vital component of both of those assets. So they all kind of complement each other in a very nice way.
Yeah, typically diet and exercise do have a pretty big impact on weight. But we'll get into all that. Tell us a little bit more about your dogs.
I have a 12-year-old border collie. His name is Pika. And then I have an 8-year-old American bully. His name is Loki. And soon to be a German short hair pointer. He's about 2 weeks old now, so it's going to be some time until he arrives at this house. He should be getting here on Labor Day.
Awesome. Where's he coming from?
Iowa.
Wow. So making the trip.
Way up there. Yeah.
So
out there and picking him up.
So I'm always intrigued when people tell me that they're getting their dog from out of state or like a long distance away. How does that connection happen? How did you find this dog? We had a previous guest on who actually found their dog on eBay, but that's another story. So yeah, how does that connection get made?
So my current dogs that I have right now are what you would consider rescue dogs. So my next dog that I have intentions for is to be a performance level dog. So I set out my research into an ethical breeder that would provide me a performance and temperament and health tested dog. So I knew what I was getting into. And that led me to finding my breeder, which she is located out in Michigan. And since the puppies are in Iowa, it's because it's a co-ownership breeding. So she owns the male that is breeding with the female, and I was able to have a selection in that litter.
Gotcha. So I did buy my puppy from a breeder as well. So I know you and I are probably gonna get a few people mad who are pretty anti-breeder and adopt only folks. But what's your thought on that?
Adopt or shop, just do it with education. So research, because there's going to be bad breeders and there's going to be bad rescues. So you make sure you choose wisely.
Yeah, and we actually heard
said.
that. That's the first time, well, the second time now that we've heard that, adopt or shop. A previous guest said that as well, and it's really just, hey, be realistic, be conscientious of who you're getting a dog from if you're going to go to a breeder, because, there's a lot of these puppy farms and puppy mills, and you have to be careful with that, because I actually have a good family friend who's she's a veterinarian over in the Boston area, and in upstate New York and northern Pennsylvania, she went to school at Cornell, but she's like in northern Pennsylvania specifically, and I'm not calling them out. I know that there's a lot of other areas in the country they do this, but there's a lot of breeders that come off as very, very responsible when realistically they're either like somewhat hoarding dogs or just breeding them irresponsibly. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. Some breeders, it feels like you're almost rescuing the dog, instead
Right.
of just chopping, I guess.
Yeah, totally. All right, so tell me. Actually, I thought about this before we started, but thinking about how the weather is in Louisiana right now, I know that you guys are having some struggles with the flooding, and it's very, very wet right now. I didn't know if there was any like specific dog or dog breed that just flourishes down there, because it's very hot, it's very muggy. Is there any, popular dog that a lot of people have down there, or is it, whatever?
I guess you could say one of the most popular ones that you find locally are Labradors, and that's simply because the area I am in is what you would call hunter's paradise. So people hunt.
Gotcha.
And they're typically used for duck hunting. And they can also be used as tracking hounds. So they have purpose when it comes to working here. But that's just talking about specifically what people do. But as a dog trainer, the quote unquote breed that I see the most is a doodle. So there's that.
Interesting. Why is that?
I just think people like it because it is cute. That's the only thing I could. It's more of a pet ownership pet when you talk about a doodle. Whereas whenever I see people with Labradors, they're likely hunting with their dog.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, having labs as hunting dogs. We're actually having a guest on tomorrow who specializes in raising hunting dogs, not breeding, but raising, and then, training hunting dogs. But you mentioned that you have the 2-week-old German short-haired pointer. I know that those are very, very popular hunting dogs as well. Do you have that in mind or no?
My goal with this dog in particular...
There they are.
There it is. Yeah, we knew it was coming. It's coming from both ends.
Quiet, Pica. Thank you. Okay, so my German short hair pointer, my goals with him is to actually just do things like agility and nose work training. So when I say nose work, there's many types of sports that apply in there. And that could be barn hunt. And then there's tracking, like search and rescue, and then there's actual tracking, and there is scent work. So there's a bunch of different sports you could do for nose work and it's using your dog's natural ability without going hunting. I'm personally not a hunter. I'm not against it. My family does it. I just don't have the time, or it doesn't motivate me.
Yeah, you don't feel like getting up at 4 a.m. and sit there until noon just to go hunting.
Not that early, but I don't want to go outside and deal with the humidity and the mosquitoes.
Yeah, I mentioned, Greg, I didn't tell you this, but when I called Ronny earlier just to talk a little bit about what we were going to accomplish on the podcast, I was like, yeah, it's 95. It's humid up here in New York State. And she's like, yeah, you're feeling the Louisiana up there right now. It was pretty funny. But, yeah, that's interesting. And there's a lot of hunting in upstate New York as well. I don't know if we mentioned this. We live in Rochester, New York, so kind of upstate Western New York, not even close to the city. A lot of people mistake that, but there's a ton of hunting up here as well. Whether it's deer or ducks or what's the flying game? I don't even know.
Pheasant?
Yeah, there's a lot of pheasant. But yeah, so we see a lot of labs up here, but we don't really see that many German short-haired pointers. I don't know why. Do they do well in the snow? They have short hair. That's the only thing I can think about.
They are upland hunters. I do believe the wire hair are more adapted for the cold, with areas with snow and ice, because they have more of the wired tempered coat. I'm not too sure but my breeder's out in Michigan, so I would assume that they're fine with the snow. I'm ashamed. I should know more about my breed that I'm buying.
No, it's okay.
It's funny. The wired hair pointers, though, I love them because it looks like they just have even when they're only a year old, they have a full on goatee beard on their thing. It's hilarious.
Awesome. So hey, tell us a little bit. How did you get started working with dogs? What made you want to go into working with dogs? I mean, we're looking at sort of your resume and what you do here, and it just seems like you're the Swiss Army knife of dog training and feeding, and you got a little bit of everything. But how'd you get started, and what made you want to work with dogs?
What started is the dogs that I own now, because they're not what I would consider easy dogs. My 12-year-old border collie is what you would expect from a border collie. So he has a high amount of requirement for physical activity. But he also has behavior quirks, so he is not very reliable around strange dogs, which made me have to pick up skills on how to be able to manage and train against that. And then along comes Loki, who I do not have any major behavior issues with him, but he's a dog that is, the best way to explain it, a bull in a china shop. And he's quite a lot for the average pet parent. So just having dogs like that in general makes you get up and do more with your dog. And in that process, I had to learn because each dog has their own individual requirements. And in this process, I just began helping friends and family, and it just blossomed into where I am today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so funny, though, because I have two dogs. I have a yellow lab, an English yellow lab, and then a yellow lab pit bull mix, and they're both completely different. They're 2 years apart. One's 8, one's 6, but the older of the two is actually the very high-strung one. I think probably it was the environment she was raised in. Greg knows about that because we kind of raised her when she was 1, and it was my last year in college, so that's not the best environment. But on the other side of things, Utley, who is the 6-year-old English lab, he is so laid back. It's almost like you think he's sleeping half the time. But he's also, he just refuses exercise. Like Greg and I are both active people. We played lacrosse in college. We're, still into fitness. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to reach out to you. Greg's trying still. He's going in a slump. But we wanted to reach out to you because, it seemed like you were very focused on the nutrition and things. But Utley's a little bit, I don't think he's obese, but he's definitely, based on what we've heard from some of our other guests, that like cardiovascular activity, whether it's, walking them or jogging them, is extremely important. I think that's something that it might inevitably hurt him because he loves to cuddle. He doesn't like to walk. You know what I mean? So I can see what you're saying when it comes to different dogs. Even if they're the same breed, they can be very different.
Absolutely. So for dogs like that, I typically just try to get them up and moving in a way that motivates them. So while your dog may want to cuddle on the ground, you could start to engage in your dog's basic hunting abilities. So a lot of things you could do is set up scent trails with food in your yard. So your dog has to find the food trail while he's walking and eating, and you could do things like that for their breakfast or dinner. So in that process, you're actually still getting your dog to get up and move to find their food versus just eating their food and then going hang out back on the couch. And sometimes in that process, you start to build this want to get up and move, and you could start to extend your dog's ability to okay, we're going to walk a little bit and eat a little bit. So essentially you start conditioning your dog to want to get up and do something. And then in that process, you start to develop a dog that actually was like, all right, we're going to go walk. This is cool. And then you start to build into your regular fitness in that regard.
Yeah, excuse me. That's actually a really great idea. Even just making, dinner time or lunch, whatever it is, fun just sounds like a good thing for almost any dog. But to be honest, the dog that we're talking about is asleep at my feet right now.
Yeah.
Just passed out.
So, all right, that's awesome. So, it seems like it was almost a calling for you to get into this. It seemed like it was something that you were naturally good at. Maybe you were attracted to, you liked doing. But I'm looking at your resume right now, and I don't want to say resume, but you're a professional dog trainer. You're a canine conditioning coach. You're a canine nutritionist. And the one thing, and we can get into all of these, but a fear-free professional when it comes to dogs and cats. But you're also CPR and first aid certified. So let's kind of work our way through that slowly. But I mean, when it comes to conditioning, we just kind of went over a couple topics and ways that you can get your dogs up and off the couch prospectively. But I mean, what do you do from a conditioning aspect that makes you a certified canine conditioning coach?
So the idea is to understand your dog's muscle groups and what is physically capable to be able to target those muscle groups in a very controlled method to promote strengthening, muscle strengthening in particular. So it's kind of like when you hire a personal trainer for ourselves to get the gains, if you will. Now, it's always knowing about what's safe and what's not and what's appropriate form. Because you could go and get some of this equipment and have your dog do some of these exercises. But if you're unfamiliar with the appropriate form and how to do it, you may not even achieve the goal you're trying to accomplish because that form is very important to that, or two, we could end up causing injury. So that's what makes it pretty important on getting someone that's very knowledgeable in that aspect, because while this type of work is very flashy when you look at it, the form is actually very important.
Gotcha.
Interesting. So, Greg and I actually, while you were talking earlier, we brought up the German short-haired pointer on Google, and I know that my experience with them, I used to live off one of the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. Doesn't matter, but it's kind of in the country, and a lot of the times they would hold these events where you were having dogs jumping off the docks, and I don't know what the event's called necessarily, dog jumping, but
dock jumping.
But you would see a lot of German short-haired pointers. So, like, in that case, I'm guessing that a lot of these dogs, functionality-wise, and then the muscle groups that they're using to do that are very accustomed and fit the bill right when it comes to doing that type of exercise and conditioning.
Well, the type of stuff that I do really applies to any type of dog. So if you have an agility dog, a house pet, or a dog that's doing dogs, Schutzen, et cetera, et cetera. So fitness as a whole doesn't need to apply to one sport, but it's definitely going to benefit a dog that is in sports, because we can start to teach them that form so it applies when they're actually doing it. Because there are exercises we could get dogs to do on specific equipment that will make them get into that forward or that extension with their legs as if they're in the air. And we're starting to build that core strength so we don't get overexertion or dogs that end up hurting themselves in the process of the sport itself.
No, that's awesome. No, that's great. So specifically for you, I know I mentioned German short-haired pointers because we've kind of been stuck on that, but if you were to deal with another particular breed, or if you could elaborate on a couple different breeds, I mean, what kind of stuff do you do? I mean, whether it's, I know there's a lot, my brother has an American bulldog. They aren't very, the thing that they are good at is jumping off of couches and face planting on the floor. So how would you condition them or help them kind of build up their conditioning? And you don't need, I don't need to put you on the spot and say, hey, just focus on them. But yeah.
I've worked with dogs of all shapes and sizes. So I've worked with little French bulldogs, and to all the way up to big mastiffs. So the size of the dog really doesn't dictate what I can and can't do, but it's what the dog is able to do. So what I mean by that is it always takes an analysis on my part to see what their current baseline is, and then we build up from there. So there's always foundational skills that we teach the dog, which the first and utmost thing that I like to work on is getting the dog to build confidence with the equipment that I used. So we just really focus on a lot in the beginning, especially if it's a beginner and a dog that's maybe doesn't have a lot of coordination. We do start with just getting the dog to offer putting their paws on the equipment versus doing very forward stretches or anything manipulative. Because if we don't have that confidence, then we won't have safety, because then the dog's going to want to freak out and bail. And I don't want to break someone's dog.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
Yeah. So we like to start with building confidence and those basic foundation skills. And then based off of that, it really depends on the individual dog's baseline fitness, because I have seen some very in shape bulldogs before too. So while some bulldogs might be very couch potato-like, I've also met some that will go jump hurdles in agility.
Yeah, and they look like they're little stocky beasts running through those kind of things, right?
Yeah, so, and of course, those bulldogs that are doing that type of activity, they do have more fitness than the dog that hangs out on the couch. And they're probably more structurally built to do that better, because I'm sure you could go on Google and type in English Bulldog and you'll get a varying look of what that breed comes out to be. Okay. And in agility, you'll probably see like a bulldog doing that behavior that has more structure that's conducive for that behavior.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I'm sorry if I don't know if you can hear it, but I appreciate you elaborating on that. But right now, I'm hearing through the headphones I have on my head. Utley's on the floor under the table, as Greg mentioned. He's snoring so loud, I think it might be coming through the microphones. No, that's very interesting. And, it seems to me like maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're very interested in focusing on, I don't want to say problematic or troublesome dogs, but those dogs that when it comes to conditioning that are a little bit more on the downslope, they might be a little bit more, very, very out of shape. I know you mentioned obesity earlier. So is that the case? I mean, do you take on dogs that people are looking to, that they're in pretty good shape, but they're looking to advance that conditioning, advance that athletic ability? Or is it typically you just kind of
into like a working dog?
Yeah. Or what do you really focus on?
For the most part, in my hand-to-hand work, it's a dog that is already fit and they're just wanting to do more with their dog and get them understanding more about their body, and then proceeding on to sports. Now, in theory, like in more like consultation work, I do have a group on Facebook called Mission Slim Possible. And that group is really focused on helping those pet parents with overweight dogs accomplish a healthy weight. And for me, that's not really a hands-on approach because I could give you the tools for you to do yourself. Because typically when we have an overweight dog, we're not going to be doing the conditioning work I do with healthy, fit dogs on fancy equipment. So when we have an overweight dog, my first goal is to try to break the habit of being sedentary. And a lot of that has to do with getting the pet parent just in the habit of getting up and walking, because some of the times that's the problem too.
Yeah,
so
I can
it's
see that.
Unless we're dealing with a human component on top of the health issue of the pet. So it's more or less moral support, if that's a good way to say it. And once the dog loses the weight and becomes a nice leaner dog that is able to physically do more fit activity without injuring itself, then we're able to proceed with, okay, now we can start doing some cool stuff.
Gotcha. So, thanks for sharing all that. So here's, I guess, a perfect example question for you. So my dog Oliver is about a year and a half, a golden retriever, American English mix. He's about 80 pounds, so he's a big boy. And he does not know that he can jump. Like, he will crawl onto the couch. As far as getting up onto the bed, which we don't allow him to do, he doesn't even think that he can jump up there.
He
when he's done it before,
on.
If he gets real excited, he'll spring right up there, but then look around like, how did I get here?
It might be,
what magic force put me up here?
That might be a compliment to your training, though. You're not allowed on furniture. He's just like, okay, I can't get on furniture.
He just doesn't know how to do it. He does the one paw after another to get up there, and it's actually pretty hilarious to watch. But it's like, dude, I know you can do this. Like, stop being so lazy. Is that like a dog? I guess my question for you, is that a dog that you could work with and boost that confidence for him to just jump up onto the couch instead of like slinking his body like a piece of mud up there?
We can help build confidence and things like that. Another thing I would also look at too, so this comes from my other standpoint, so is there possibly a medical issue or an orthopedic issue that's causing him not to want to jump?
Not that I know of. I mean, everything vet-wise is checked out. That's
what I see as a professional when I get questions like that. So I'm like, so have we made sure that we have no orthopedic issues that could be our dog doesn't want to jump because maybe his knees are a bum knee? And that's easily validated by your vet. And like you said, if you checked it, that's great. So it could just one be because he's not confident, or two, it just because he's not sure what's going to happen if he does jump up on the couch.
I feel like just from being around Greg raising his dog, he did a great job training his dog. And,
Debatable.
well, but raising for the most part, and I know that they never let him on furniture, so I feel like his jumping muscles have actually atrophied to the point where he can't use them anymore. It's like the nerve endings in the muscles don't even fire. That's how I picture it.
You think so?
No, I'm kind of just joking.
He is allowed on
I'm
the
just
couch.
joking. I know.
First off, everyone. He's allowed on the couch, just not the bed.
All right. Well, no, that's awesome. I appreciate the feedback and your elaboration on conditioning your dogs in general and a couple different breeds. But why don't you talk a little bit about being a certified canine nutritionist? Because
you can do it.
We were looking at your Instagram, which is awesome. And for everybody listening, if you want to check her Instagram out, it's at perfectly rawsome. It is legit. I mean, you have some professional photos on here, but what's unique about these is that everything on the plates in these photos is raw. I mean, that it makes sense because it's perfectly rawsome, but when it comes to nutrition, I can see right now, and obviously one of the reasons we brought you on here is for this reason, but it's all raw food. I mean, there's fish, there's beef, there's chicken, there's pork, there's everything that you could think of when it comes to eating raw food. It honestly looks like I'm about to cook a 5-course meal for a family and friends, but it's on dog bowls or dog plates. So tell us a little bit about that and how you got into it.
So I got into raw feeding because of my American bully Loki. When he came to us, no matter what I fed him, suited him. So he would lose fur. He would just look homeless. So I read about raw feeding, and this was probably around 6.5 years ago. And I've always been a clean eater myself. So when I learned about raw feeding for dogs, it just made sense. And I dove headfirst into it. Mm-hmm. And I've saw the changes within a month in Loki's overall appearance. And I was just sold from that point forward. And as I just kept feeding my dogs raw, I had more people asking me questions on how to do it. And going back to my actual education from college, I graduated UL in Lafayette with a graphic design major. So I have experience in marketing, graphic design, and advertisement.
And it shows, not to interrupt you, but it shows on your Instagram because the photos on here are amazing. I mean, you've done a great job. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming you took these. Did you do this?
Yes, I have.
That's awesome.
The ones of my meals are mine, but I do share other content. So if it's you'll always see if it's mine, it has my logo on it. If my logo is not in the photo, it's shared content.
They're all very similar, and I like how you've kept them consistent. So everybody, again, check her out at Perfectly Rawsome. But yeah, that's awesome. So that's cool. That's interesting that you said that because that's a interesting transition from going from Lafayette, graduating in graphic design, and then transitioning into this. But it's obviously benefiting you, Thank
you. Well, and then just right in between that, I was a freelance designer, and I was working in a print market where I was making books and stuff like that. And I began to notice the print industry was dying. So I switched over to the web industry, which is when I learned how to design and develop websites. And that's when I created the Perfectly Rawsome website. And in that process, it just grew into a community that's just ridiculously large. And now it's pretty much my full-time job on top of dog training.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
And that's just led me to where I am today. And I went to school to the Companion Animal Science Institute. It's an online program. It's based out of Canada, but they have their full nutrition program. And I completed their Canine Nutrition, the first one. I do plan on enrolling again, which is for their advanced course, and that's to learn about feeding for diseases and ailments.
Wow, that's awesome. No, that's great. One, because not only I'm impressed because you're trying to advance your education, and it seems like you're not content just being where you are, but you're branching out, I guess, to, Canada, where we've had a couple guests on who live in Canada who have, actually we had one reporter, and I guess that would be what would you consider him, Greg?
Who?
I guess a reporter, but they did a lot of reporting on the Iditarod, and they've talked a little bit about the training and things that you need to do, specifically being up in the Canadian wilderness when it comes to dogs, when it comes to illnesses they can acquire up there, and what you need to worry about, and especially in the Northeast when it comes to ticks and things like that. But that's awesome. I know it's totally different being down in Louisiana, but that's so cool to me, and I love how you've been taking advantage of your initial degree, but then also continuing your education. It's so cool.
So I've got a really good question for you here. I know there's been in recent days a trend, which has been carb-free diets for dogs and people, but that's another story. So the whole carb-free diet for dogs, high in protein, yada yada. And my last vet visit, the vet actually warned me about these diets, saying dogs have been now coming in with heart disease, and linking it to this carb-free diet. So what's your general thought on that and opinion?
So first, the dietary-induced DCM is being investigated by the FDA for grain-free, not carbohydrate-free.
Okay, grain-free. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I have my suspicions on what the problem is. Of course, there's not enough data to confirm it. And I did recently make a massive post on my Facebook page for Perfectly Rawsome about this dietary-induced DCM. But to condense it, there's multiple things at work here. So when we discuss the nutritional components of what the dogs require, our dogs require 2 amino acids, methionine and cysteine. And these amino acids are necessary for dogs to synthesize taurine. And why these amino acids are important is for healthy heart function. When we discuss AAFCO minimum requirements when it comes to nutrients, and we compare them to other nutritional guidelines, such as FEDAF or NRC, we'll start to notice that AAFCO minimums for amino acids are significantly lower than these other guidelines, FEDAF and NRC. Mm-hmm. So my one problem I see is because AAFCO has these such low minimum requirements for amino acids, that's strike number one when we start talking about heart issues. Because if the diet's not providing enough amino acids for healthy organ and muscle function, we're setting us up for failure, essentially, in that regard. Now, taking it on to step 2. When we take away grains from kibble, the diet needs a starch to be able to create the kibble, the little cookies. So if we take away grains, we take away starch. So we have to be able to get the starch from something, and that's where legumes enter in. So peas, beans, lentils, etc. All these ingredients are used for the starch, but the problem is they have a lot of anti-nutrients, so like lectins, phytates, and that will also inhibit nutrient absorption. So when we have this problem here, so you can see if we use a diet that's high in anti-nutrients and then it's already low in amino acids, we could also make those levels even lower because of that. Another problem with these legumes is that kibble companies actually will use them to make a false appearance that the food is high in protein, but it's incomplete protein because, say, things like beans and lentils, they are very high in protein. That's what vegans and vegetarians eat, but they don't provide all the amino acids essential for health. So it looks like the food's high in protein, but it's not providing all the necessary amino acids. And you combine those problems and you're starting to get a recipe for disaster. And that's my personal take on it. Like I said, this is going to be something that's going to be investigated for a very long time. That's what I suspect with the FDA, because they don't really even know what's going on. Everyone's arguing about this.
Yeah,
But
that's awesome. Keep going.
long ago with the taurine issue, and we had cats showing up with DCM, and they ended up having to redesign cat nutritional requirements because of that. And we're kind of seeing somewhat of the similar issues with dogs now.
Is DCM, is that something to do with their heart? I'm sorry, I stepped out quick. I had to go to the bathroom. But is DCM like some sort of cardiomyopathy with cats, or how does that work?
Dilated cardiomyopathy.
Okay, yeah, I can see that, and I just stepped back in. I'm sorry, I missed the question Greg asked you, but yeah, I mean, I can totally see, and one thing we talked about, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard now on social media, listen to like Joe Rogan podcast, is like a lot of people have transitioned to trying to feed their cats and dogs a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet because that's what they do. And we already touched on how if you live a sedentary lifestyle, a lot of the times your dog's gonna be doing the same thing. You've seen people that have blonde hair and they have a white poodle or whatever it is. A lot of people literally relate to their dog in so many more aspects than you think, but it's ridiculous how people think that they can transition what they do to a dog's life, and that's where it gets kind of scary because they need so much more and so many different things than we need.
Absolutely. I have friends that are vegetarian and vegans that still feed their dogs raw, and I have the utmost respect for them because they're putting away their cognitive bias to be able to provide their dog with their biological requirements. And to me, that's really, really something to respect.
Yeah, that seems really counterintuitive to being a vegetarian. But
awesome. No, I mean, I respect them too. Yeah, that's awesome. They care enough about their pet. They don't have to, whatever social bias is coming in, and they're like, hey, I'm a vegan. My dog's a vegan. No, they're actually caring for the dog in the way they need to. So I agree with you. That's totally awesome.
And hey, just for our listeners, you mentioned AFCO, FEDEC, and NCR or NRC. Describe those for us, just for the listeners who aren't familiar with them.
So NRC is the Nutritional Research Council. So both of these, NRC is a private research facility, or I don't know the right appropriate word to call them, where AFCO is the American Feed Officials for the United States, and FEDAF is the same component as AFCO, but it's for the Europe and UK area.
Gotcha.
Interesting. All right. So, and again, I apologize because I had to step out. But
we're talking about grain-free diets, cardiac issues in dogs.
Understood. Yeah. I don't want to branch into my line of work, but I do work with cardiac patients in humans when it comes to certain cardiovascular disease. Obviously, one of the biggest causes of death in the United States. But tell us a little bit more about how you work nutrition, not only with your dogs, but also some of the dogs that you work with, or maybe just tell us about one or two cases that you've worked with recently when you've kind of changed or manipulated their diet to work better for their breed or their lifestyle.
So I could actually use one of my dogs as a really good example right now, because he has came off of about 3 months of we've had some medical issues, and he dropped weight really low to where I was very uncomfortable. So we had to focus on getting him to gain weight, and then he gained too much weight. And then I had the problem, okay, now we need to get him to the stable, healthy weight so we could begin to get into our conditioning routine. So when he was really thin, I was feeding him high protein, high fat diet. So making sure he was getting enough amino acids to rebuild his muscles and fat for energy. And then once I saw he was too fat, I did moderate protein, low fat, high fiber. So we could start to get the body to burn the body fat that I wanted to go away. Moderate protein, so we didn't have muscle loss, but the fiber was there to help give the sensation of feeling full, because I had to reduce calories. And that, of course, means reducing the volume of food. And that dog in particular is a gluttonous dog. So taking food away from him is probably like a death sentence in his mind. So adding in that fiber-based food helped that sensation of feeling full. And now he went to the vet yesterday for some allergy test issues on his skin. And with his weigh-in, he's actually at a good stable weight that I'm comfortable with. And now we are in the routine of getting him back in being fit, because those 3 months of his medical issues, I was not walking him. We weren't doing anything high intensity for cardiovascular health. So his stamina and endurance and everything is like gone. So I'm pretty much following my own advice right now by making sure every day we get up and I walk him to his baseline requirements, to where I start to see he's getting physically fatigued, and then we quit. So that way every day I'm starting to push that baseline to where I could start to get him to a point where I could walk him for 2 miles at a very decent pace without him dying. Mm-hmm. And once I achieve that, then I know I could start getting into more strenuous activities, like going out and play fetch or letting him swim, because he likes to swim. He likes to play fetch. But if he doesn't have the endurance to support it, he's going to end up hurting himself or drowning.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and
no
don't
one wants that.
I know, and I don't mean to be selfish about this, Greg,
Scott,
and Ronnie, but what you just described, what breed of dog was that?
He's an American bully.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting then, because he likes swimming, and I can see. I know a lot of American bullies. Oh, you were talking about your dog still. I'm sorry. I was kind of daydreaming on that. But
turn your brain on.
Well, my dog Utley, he is, like I said, an English lab, but he very similarly is going through a stage where he actually has some allergy issues, but loves playing fetch, loves swimming, loves doing all that stuff. And it actually made me think about not only Utley, but Greg sitting across the table from me, because Greg used to be able to run a 5.5 minute mile. And now
I can't even walk that.
Yeah, nowadays I have to go over there and drag Greg out so he can walk a 15-minute mile. I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. But no, that seems very logical to what you're doing, and it seems like you're very precise and calculated with what you're doing with him. But what I wanted to ask was,
can you come and just train me personally? Like, I want all of this: diet, exercise, like.
When it comes down to like allergies, though, and you don't need to get into it right now. I know I kind of interjected when I maybe shouldn't have, but when it comes to allergies, depending on the dog breed, I mean, what is your first step to identify what the cause is?
That is always me talking with the vet, honestly, because it depends on the response we're seeing in the dog. So my dog in particular, I already know what his problems are. It's all environmental. It's either pollen or insects. And in this case, the problem that we're having right now, it's insects. Something bit him and it caused a response in his body, and he's starting to lose his fur. So he looks homeless right now.
You said that earlier. I thought I actually had a very hilarious picture in my head. It was a dog living on the street with, patchy hair and a bum hat on, which means he's wearing a oversized beanie, living in San Francisco, taking a shit on the street, which people are doing, so he's probably fitting in perfect. Sorry.
It's really funny. A lot of the stories we tell that involve dogs that are either going into space or are used for some government programs, almost always they use like homeless street dogs, which is just really odd. They say they're tougher and they have a tougher mentality. Sorry,
makes no sense.
I am rambling, but yeah.
So yeah, sorry to interject. No, I just, when it comes to allergies, and she answered it, it's just really kind of contact your vet, see what environmental or whatever factors are affecting it. And I think I've narrowed it down, and it's sorry that I'm kind of continuing on here. Utley spends a lot of time up in Canada, but on a island scenario where he's in the water all the time. He's constantly wet. You can't wash and dry towels, so you don't utilize those towels to dry the dog off that often. So he's constantly wet for like 2 weeks at a time in the summer. So I think it has to do with maybe like, I mentioned this last episode. I feel like he has like trench foot, but it's like on his skin, on his back.
No, absolutely like a thing. So one thing people do is if your dog could be trained to accept a blow dryer, is to start blow drying your dog. Because it's what happens is you have he's a golden retriever, right?
Lab, but yeah.
Lab. So their coats are quite thick. So when that moisture stays in there, it starts to grow some fun stuff. And that's when you start getting like the dog that smells like an outside dog, or when we start to get like hot spots and stuff like that. So, or even things like what we would say, quote unquote, allergies. It just might be because his coat is growing some fun stuff because it's always wet.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of what I've deducted from talking to a few others, but I appreciate your input because you're just confirming what I think I was assuming initially. But so let's move on. Are you okay moving on from being the canine nutritionist, or do you want to continue to talk about that? So the one thing that was actually one of the few real questions and confusions, I don't know if it's a word, that I had on the notes we took, were you're a certified fear-free professional when it comes to dogs and cats. So I mean, I can kind of get an idea of what that means, and I think that I know what that means, but why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
He has no clue what that means.
Yeah, I might not have an idea, but why don't you elaborate for us?
So Fear-Free Professionals is an organization that has the goal to help change the perception on how our animals receive vet care. And I'm not sure how you guys have vet care with your dogs, but typically it's very force inclined. So meaning that they forced your dog into positions for certain examinations, or how the whole examination as a whole could be very stressful for your pet. So the idea of Fear-Free Professionals is to provide the education on how to create cooperative care. And when I say cooperative care, I mean whenever I go to a vet and my vet wants to examine my dog in a specific way, I'll ask her, what position you want him in? Okay, we've trained to do this. Let me get him there. And when he's in that position, you could continue with your exam, versus the vet techs doing forceful grabs to hold him.
Yeah, and not even forceful. I know what you're saying, but like just an uncomfortable position that might be traditionally okay. Yeah.
I'm saying force, not in a way to be negative. It has to be done in a vet experience. You know, we have to hold a dog's head so it doesn't swing it if they're taking blood, right? But there is a force implied. But to give an example, since my dog went to the vet yesterday, he had to do a blood draw. And typically what that's done in a vet visit is the techs, there will be a tech that will go and hold the dog's head straight up, and a tech in behind that holds the dog still. And since I have done the work with my dog, he's been trained to go behind me, get in between my legs, and sit and look straight up at me, which gives the vet and the vet techs complete access to his artery nerve and his neck. And all I have to do is have him hold it. I put my hand underneath his chin and I have him hold a stay. They pull the blood. When they get away, he gets a reward with food. So in that process, it's less stress for my dog. It's more cooperation versus forcing him into compliance. And the reason why I like things like that is because we could start to get a less stressful vet visit. Because if you start to take dogs with real behavior issues to a vet, and then they do very forceful manipulations onto your dog, we can start to backslide on their behavior problems, because then we start to validate how the dog feels.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome point. That's an awesome point, because I took Greg to the doctor the other day because Greg's butt was feeling kind of weird and he needed a colonoscopy, and I started to put Greg up on a bench and he felt kind of uncomfortable. Sorry, I can't help but just tear Greg apart over there, but continue.
No, but that's a lot what Fear-Free is. It's just really teaching how to do these types of situations that needs to happen to our dogs, like getting our nails trimmed and or getting blood drawn or vaccinations or ear exams or grooming. It's just it's a different form of training, but it's to get the dog to comply. And it's a pretty beautiful thing when you see it happening because it's not stressful. The dog's not stressed. The humans aren't stressed, and we accomplish the goal.
No, that's exactly what you're looking for. And on a realistic note, I'm sorry to interject with a joke with Greg, but Utley, again, I'm going to bring it back to myself. He consistently, even when you're not looking, will just lay on his back. He's very comfortable with his laying on his back with his feet up in the air. So he had never had his nails trimmed, and you just mentioned that, by myself or my fiance Leah or anybody until he was 7 or 6 years old, until this year. So I had tried multiple times in the past by having him sit with his front paws kind of in my hands, and I could never clip his nails. He never felt comfortable. And then finally I went over to do it, and I kind of fed him a couple treats here and there when he was on his back, and he loved it. He couldn't get enough of it. It was almost like he was being rewarded for doing something amazing. And realistically, he was just laying on his back, but that makes total sense.
Yep, that's how I clip. I clip actually both of my dog's nails entirely different, and it's just based off of how they are comfortable. So my American Bully, he goes on my couch and he lays down on his side to where his legs are facing the edge of the couch to where I could just sit on the ground and clip him. And I normally between each paw, he'll get treats as a reward for being nice and calm. Whereas my Border Collie, he likes to lay on his back like your dog. So I will take out his orthopedic bed, I sit on top of it, and I have him lay down in between my legs, clip his nails in the same fashion. So it's always, I've tried to find where the dog is selecting their comfort, and then we adjust accordingly.
No, that makes total sense. That's awesome. I love that, a lot of people, it seems so basic. A lot of people don't think about this kind of stuff, especially when you're bringing a dog into the vet or a cat into the vet. And it's one of those stressful situations where you typically and naturally want to force your dog or cat into a situation that they're just not comfortable with. But if you can, like you said, maybe train your dog to be comfortable in a situation, for your example, when you had your dog come in between your legs, look up at you for a command, but then it also opens up their whatever vein or whatever for a shot. That's perfect. And, if you can make them feel comfortable, you're not going to have situations where people are carrying in cats in a cage because they're freaking out. I know the cats are a little bit different than dogs, but you're not going to have your dog in a muzzle or something like that you see at the vets because they just feel comfortable going there. We have a we have a really good friend. He has a husky who's a lover. I mean, she is an absolute lover. Every time you go up to her, if you see her from 100 yards away, she'll just roll over onto her back and want her belly rubbed. She's amazing, but when he goes to the vet, she kind of like snaps a little bit. And I think maybe it could be related to what you were just talking about. It could be related to the fact that at some point in her upbringing, she didn't feel comfortable going into the vet. So, I totally agree and fully back what you're saying. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is, what that tick is with those dogs that's going to make them feel comfortable going into that situation.
Absolutely. And then, of course, part of the fear-free component is there is specific dogs that while we can train them and give them the tools to teach the dog that it's what I would say comfortable and okay, there's some very extreme instances. So like feral cats, sometimes these cats have to be tranquilized just for the safety of the vet clinic. And sometimes they do try their absolute best. There is specific cat muzzles to be able to prevent bites, and there's swaddling methods to be able to prevent scratching. But there is always the extreme cases where sometimes these animals do have to have that protective measure just for the safety of the clinic.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we're coming close to an hour here. I mean, I'm good to talk all night. This is awesome. Are you under any time constraints or what?
No, we're good to go.
Awesome. So what is What's like the craziest dog story that you have?
Oh man, I don't know. In what in particular?
Just any dog story. It could be like a really awesome transformation that you had with a dog, or it could just be like a funny dog story and anything at all.
And let me lead you into this just because we had one more point that we discussed earlier that I think would be great to elaborate on. You are a CPR and first aid certified for dogs and cats. So has there been, and I hope not, but I do hope that you have a story that there was a situation where maybe you had to give CPR to a dog or a cat or a baby. I'm just kidding. But tell us a little bit about, like Greg just said, one of the craziest stories that you've been a part of, whether it's good, bad, positive or negative.
I've never had to give CPR, thank goodness, but I have had to Heimlich my own personal dog, and multiple times, and I have had to physically put my hand down his throat and unlodge food before. Ugh. So for me, knowing that information that I know has saved my dog's life. Because I know many pet parents in that situation that I was put in. Even my husband told me if he was home and that would have happened to him, he wouldn't have known what to do.
That's terrifying.
So, right. And I have both of my dogs have put me through my own personal training, and this Loki is the one that has taught me a lot in this regard because he is very ravenous with food. And there was recently when he was going through his medical issues, the medication that he was on stimulated his appetite, and he is already a very greedy dog. So I make jokes about it, but it was like I had a monster in my house because it wasn't the same dog that I was dealing with. If you ever heard of a woodpecker pecking on wood, my dog was making these chattering noises with his jaws when it came dinner time. That's how aroused and amped up he was getting because of his hunger at this time. And when I would feed him, he was like a Hoover vacuum. And one day I misgauged on preparing his food appropriate for the behavior that I was seeing, and he hoovered it and he was collapsing. And I Heimlicked him 4 times, if my memory's not failing me, and it wasn't working. And he got on the ground and I literally punched him in his rib cage. He fell to the ground and I just stuck my hand down his throat and I pulled the piece of meat out of his throat. And then, of course, he got up, caught his breath, and from all the force of the Heimlich, he ended up vomiting from that. So that's my own personal experience using my CPR and first aid training on my own dog. And thankfully, that's really the only time I've had to use it is on my own personal dog. So I'm grateful for that information.
That is absolutely crazy.
Hell yeah. I'd give you a high five if you're here right now. That's awesome.
I'm like, my hair's standing up just like hearing this story. I'm terrified.
Oh my God. That's crazy. And the reason we asked, just because I didn't know, well, one, what a Heimlich would look like on a dog, but I guess it consists mainly of just either punching or somehow initiating pressure to eject some sort of something on the dog. But same with CPR. It just that's kind of crazy for me to think about. But yeah, you did a great job. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really puts you in total damage control mode. It's like time goes slow and you're like, okay, we have to do all these things or your dog's gonna die.
Yikes.
And he's had multiple episodes where I've Heimlicked him before, but it wasn't as bad as that episode. Like, there was times I've Heimlicked him, but I knew he was still breathing, but there was just something lodged in there. So those times when it's happened, I'm like, dude, you just need to cough it up. Whereas this time, I was genuinely terrified for my dog's life.
Oh my God. I can't imagine. Well, I feel like based on that story, you dealt with it like a professional as you are. That's awesome. I
sat down and I zoned out for like 40 minutes because I was just on an adrenaline high.
Oh my God, I'm sure. That's one of those things you can't prepare for. You're just your blood pressure, your adrenaline is through the roof, and then it takes a good 20, 30 minutes afterwards for you to calm down. He was probably walking around like, "Hey, what happened?" And you're like, "I just saved your life, man."
Right? He's asking for more food. He's like, I'm
Yeah.
No, you can't eat the food you just fucking puked up after I saved your life, man.
Oh god.
That's amazing. Well, Ronny, we're coming up. I think we're a little bit over an hour now. This was amazing. You've been awesome. I love everything that you've contributed to the podcast. You certainly are, honestly, the most. I don't want to shoot any darts at Scott, but you are very, very, very professional. You have a lot of experience. I appreciate the fact that he introduced us realistically, through the grapevine, but. We'd love to have you on again at some point. I know it's tough to cover everything that you know and everything that you do in 1 hour session, but before we sign off, before we get off the podcast, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, visit the website, all that kind of stuff?
So I have multiple platforms. My main business is perfectlyrawsome.com. So that's my website. If you're interested in learning how to feed your dog, puppy, or your cat raw, you have a website filled with free guides to guide you on the way. If you want one-on-one help, I do have meal plan services to be able to do that with you. In addition to my website, I have my Perfectly Rawsome Instagram, so that's at Perfectly Rawsome, and then I have my Facebook page, which is Perfectly Rawsome as well. Also, if you're on Facebook, I have a large raw feeding community. So that's called the Raw Feeding University on Facebook. And that's a group to help facilitate a community to learn about raw feeding outside of my website. On top of that, I have the Mission Slim Possible Facebook group. And while it is focused on helping overweight dogs achieve fitness, it does welcome fit and healthy dogs, because once our overweight dogs achieve fitness, we have to educate on how to maintain that fitness, and that group helps facilitate that. And I'm a dog trainer here in Lafayette, Louisiana for a company called Sit Happens, and we do behavior modification and obedience training for our pet parents out in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ronny. And Greg and I, we always end our episodes by saying wag more, bark less. We'd love you to either start or finish it, but we just kind of scream it realistically into the mic.
Oh my god.
Do you want us to start?
I'll go ahead and start. So wag more.
Bark less. Woo! Thanks, Ronny.
Get out of here, Scott. You're creep.
Oh, Greg, you train dogs? You love dogs? Do you touch dogs? Yes, you do.
It's all about that canine life, son. Get up on it.
It's all about that canine life, Greg. You're so ridiculous.
Feeding dogs, walking dogs, and loving dogs.
Feed them, love them, touch them, pet them, walk them, eat them. No, don't eat them. This isn't it. Fucking Asia.
Jesus, get out of here.